These are three of SpongeBob's darkest episodes. If you want to see how dark a kids show can get, watched till the end. The first episode is Rock Bottom, begins just outside of Glove World. SpongeBob and Patrick had spent the entire day there and were finally ready to head back home. They got on the bus like usual, or at least as usual as it could be. But something wasn't right. They had accidentally gotten on the wrong bus. Before they could ask the driver to stop, the bus suddenly dropped straight down, eventually coming to a halt far beneath Bikini Bottom. This place was unlike anywhere else they had ever seen. It was so deep that no sunlight reached it. The bus driver kicked SpongeBob and Patrick off and drove away, leaving them stranded in a place called Rock Bottom. The two were terrified. Whether it was the darkness, the creepy silence, or the fact that they were completely alone, something about the town felt wrong. The area looked abandoned. It was quiet, with the only source of light coming from a nearby bus station. Patrick quickly began to panic and desperately wanted to go home. Unfortunately, there was nothing they could do except wait. SpongeBob decided to walk over to the bus station, but before he could even reach it, another bus arrived. And Patrick got on without him. The driver didn't wait for SpongeBob. He ran after the bus, not wanting to be left behind, but he wasn't fast enough. Once again, all he could do was wait. But each time a bus arrived, SpongeBob would get distracted for just a moment and miss it. Eventually, he met one of the locals and tried asking for help, but the fish misunderstood him and went after his balloon instead. Buses continued to arrive and leave, almost as if they were intentionally abandoning SpongeBob. Eventually, he returned to the bus station to check the schedule. After waiting in line, he finally made it to the front, only to find out that the last bus had already left. Unable to stand being there any longer, SpongeBob demanded another bus, but none came. This time, the station light went out too, leaving him in complete darkness. SpongeBob began to panic. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise. It grew louder and louder as if something was approaching him. He tried to move away, but there was nowhere to go. As he was cornered, the sound of footsteps became clearer, until it was revealed to be the same fish from earlier. The fish had retrieved SpongeBob's balloon, reinflated it, and helped him escape Rock Bottom and get home safely. And with that, the episode ended. This is one of SpongeBob's most iconic episodes. While it doesn't contain any obvious dark themes, the reason it stands out is the atmosphere. The sound design, the visuals, the colors, and the overall vibe. The story itself isn't truly scary, aside a little bit near the end. But the tone alone makes it memorable. Moving on, the next episode is Demolition Doofus. SpongeBob wakes up that morning just as optimistic as ever. That day, he was going to take his boating test once again. The test barely lasted any time at all. SpongeBob couldn't even get out of the parking space. Every time he crashed, Mrs. Puff inflated more and more, until the boat eventually flew into the air and crashed into a building. SpongeBob walked away unharmed, but Mrs. Puff had popped. At the hospital, the doctor explained that she had inflated so much during the accident that she could never puff again. This was SpongeBob's fault, and she knew it. Naturally, she wanted nothing to do with him. But SpongeBob visited her anyway. He tried to cheer her up by taking her for a walk. During their stroll, they saw several injured people being rushed into the hospital. The doctor explained that they had been hurt while participating in a demolition derby. Hearing this sparked an idea for Mrs. Puff. She laughed at the thought of never having to deal with SpongeBob again and signed him up for the derby. SpongeBob had no idea what he was getting himself into. The event began shortly after, with each driver being introduced one by one. SpongeBob was introduced last. Mrs. Puff set him up completely, giving him the smallest boat and somehow convincing him to wear a sock over his head. She smiled, believing her years of suffering were finally about to end. But SpongeBob didn't lose. In fact, every hit somehow worked in his favor. With each failed attempt, Mrs. Puff grew more frustrated, even breaking down at one point. She shouted for SpongeBob to die, but he misunderstood her. In the end, SpongeBob destroyed every other vehicle without a single scratch. This wasn't the outcome Mrs. Puff wanted. Desperate, she entered the derby herself in a massive boat. recklessly speeding towards SpongeBob and even crashing into civilians along the way. Completely focused on him, she failed to notice they had reached the boating school. The two crashed into it, restoring Mrs. Puff's ability to puff, and ending the episode. This episode doesn't hide its darkest element at all. Mrs. Puff openly tries to kill SpongeBob. Her descent into madness leads to the destruction of her school and puts innocent people in danger. The final episode starts with SpongeBob and Gary. SpongeBob prepares for work while also getting Gary's food ready. As he leaves, Gary follows him to the door, wanting to go with him. SpongeBob refuses because he needs to get to work. Once SpongeBob leaves, Gary uses his leash to grab snacks and watches TV. Meanwhile, SpongeBob feels overwhelming guilt for leaving Gary alone. He spends the entire day thinking about what a bad pet owner he is. After work, he rushes home, wondering how he can care for Gary while working at the Krusty Krab. On his way home, he passes a street vendor selling pets. SpongeBob realizes that if Gary had a companion, he wouldn't be lonely. The vendor tries warning him, but SpongeBob ignores it and brings the new pet home. He introduces Gary to Puffy Fluffy. Gary tries to greet him, but Puffy reacts aggressively, only returning to normal when SpongeBob is present. Once SpongeBob leaves, Puffy becomes hostile, stealing Gary's food and destroying his bowl. Gary was obviously terrified and hid behind the TV. Puffy followed Gary and was about to eat him, but just as it was about to, SpongeBob came back to the room, and again, it transformed back to normal. While SpongeBob was away, Puffy made another attempt to go after Gary, but this time, Gary narrowly got away. SpongeBob never witnessed any of it and simply assumed that Gary just didn't get along with the new pet. He even forces them to sleep together. He put both of them back in the same bed. But this bed wasn't inside his room like before, meaning nothing was stopping Puffy from trying to kill Gary again. Not long after, Gary rushed into SpongeBob's room. Clearly, he'd been attacked. Once again, SpongeBob didn't think much of it and put Gary back to bed. But Puffy was gone. Or rather, there was a fake Puffy. Moments later, Gary heard a noise coming from the kitchen and went to investigate. What he saw looked like a giant eel eating straight out of SpongeBob's fridge. It was Puffy. Gary wasn't going to mess around anymore and went to confront him. But Puffy had changed a lot in just a few minutes. He attacked Gary again, and this time, Gary was truly afraid. This wasn't a fight he could win, but he tried anyway. Puffy chased Gary all over SpongeBob's house. With nothing but luck, Gary managed to avoid every one of Fluffy's attacks. Fluffy grew irritated. He knocked over firewood onto SpongeBob's books, setting the library on fire. But it didn't bother him at all. Gary tried to fight the flames and eventually put them out, but Fluffy kept eating everything in sight, growing larger every second. Gary tried biting him, but that only hurt Gary instead. Before he could recover, Puffy lunged at him. The house began falling apart with every move they made. Puffy chased Gary throughout the entire night. The next day, SpongeBob woke up and noticed chunks of brick scattered across his floor. At first, he brushed it off, but he quickly realized this wasn't some normal accident. By then, Gary had lost, but somehow death was on his side. Puffy dropped Gary and grabbed SpongeBob instead. While Puffy was distracted, Gary grabbed his whip and managed to chase Fluffy away, saving SpongeBob. And that's where the episode ends. This episode isn't very good. In fact, it's often considered one of the worst SpongeBob episodes. But it does succeed at being scary. Fluffy's design is genuinely disturbing, and seeing Gary fear for his life adds real tension and urgency. Anyway, that's all for this video. Let me know in the comments which episodes you think are the darkest. And as always, stay safe. I'll see you next time.